Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. South Carolina heading on the road to play Alabama in a matchup deal where both of these programs need to get something going. Looking for kind of a rebound performance. You look at Alabama losing to Vanderbilt. Now, credit Vanderbilt. Like, it's a much better Vanderbilt than we're used to seeing. That being said, an unacceptable performance from that Alabama defense. And I'll just quickly throw this out. Like, Kane Womack, I'm not ready to call for his job. That seat's got to be warm because you look at the last 6 quarters of football for Alabama on defense, it has not been good. Georgia, I think, scored on every single possession in the second half pretty much. Vanderbilt might have punted, 3 times in that football game. That Alabama defense just didn't seem prepared to play Vanderbilt. Let's be frank about it. Alabama's bigger, stronger, faster than what they saw against Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt just out-schemed it, and it looked like Alabama just wasn't prepared for what Vanderbilt was going to throw at them. You look at South Carolina, a little bit of a different story, right? South Carolina defense, I think, is legit. Like, I think this defense is one of the better defenses in the SEC, but you look at the offense and just say they don't really have an identity. They struggle pushing the ball down the field. One, I don't think the playmakers on the outside are necessarily where you want it. I think more importantly, the offensive line and pass protection continues to be a problem. And that's not where you want to be in the SEC, especially with the young quarterback in Lenore Sellers. I think a few intriguing matchups to get into. Now, before we do, and as always, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. I mean, it's been a wild last couple of weeks of college football. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section, whether you agree with the boys, whether you disagree. If you guys enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's start with this South Carolina offense versus this Alabama defense, because that's where I think both units have been struggling as of late. How you see this matchup kind of panning out here?
Now, frankly, I think a lot of people look at it and be like, oh, South Carolina can run a similar system to what Vanderbilt ran. And I think you're right. I mean, you look, that's too talented of an Alabama defense, especially in the front seven, to look the way they looked. And you look, especially at the linebackers in defensive ends, they just were like very slow reacting to everything. It didn't feel like they were ready to even play kind of that option style look that Vanderbilt wanted to run. So I'm kind of with you. I mean, I'm not like Kane Womack's not really on the hot seat, but they were giving him a lot of airtime on that Georgia-Alabama game, and he had his wry little smile. And then you come in and you get the doors blown off you on that side of the ball. Because Alabama's offense, I know they had a couple snafus, a couple turnovers, but they did their part. I mean,
Alabama's offense averaged 9 yards per play. Like, they were averaging a first down every time they snapped the football. Yeah,
they had no drives that Alabama defense couldn't get them or couldn't keep Vanderbilt off the field effectively. Now, I think actually, again, South Carolina, can they do something similar to an extent? But I will say Lenora Sellers needs to make the throws that Pavia is making. Like, as much as it was predicated on that ground attack that Vandy was running, they got Alabama to play a lot of man coverage, trying to get those safeties involved in that run attack that Vandy was hitting them with. And then they hit them, and they beat man coverage pretty consistently, a lot more consistently, frankly, than I think Alabama should be comfortable with. So, again, can Lenora Sellers make those type of throws, those 3rd and 8s, extend drives, keep Alabama's offense on the field, and give themselves a chance to play them the way Vandy played them?
Yeah, and that's what Lenore Sellers has been struggling with. And again, I don't think it's all on Lenore. So I think the pass protection has been, I wouldn't say a disaster, but it certainly hasn't been good. And it's pretty obvious you're starting a left tackle there as a true freshman. The reason I say Kane Womack hot seat conversation is it just seemed like they just weren't prepared for this football game. And I wonder if you're South Carolina, you can use some of the concepts that Vanderbilt was able to do to have some success against Alabama. Now I look at it and say it would be a real problem. Like, he would actually be on the hot seat if South Carolina comes into Tuscaloosa and puts up a lot of points running a similar system, because then it's like you're just not making any adjustments. So I'm kind of excited to see what adjustments Alabama might make on defense. I think the last point I want to get at is, can South Carolina hit a few explosive plays in the air, as talented as these Alabama defensive backs are, and how they've made some really good plays this year? They're also young, specifically guys like Jalen Mbakwe and Xavier Brown. If you're South Carolina and you want to hang in this game and you want to potentially win this football game, it feels like some of those explosive plays that Vanderbilt or Georgia were able to kind of come by, it just feels like you got to have one or two of those plays on Saturday afternoon.
Because there's a reason that when Georgia saw man coverage one-on-one with their boundary receivers, it was pretty much, well, we're just going to throw it up and see if these Alabama corners can make a play on the ball. And that's certainly been an issue with that youth, some of that inexperience. That ability to play the ball in the air has certainly been a problem. It was a huge problem against Georgia. It was a bit of a problem, frankly, against Vandy. And it was a little bit of a different system, but like quick slants, some of those plays that, like, again, you want your corner to play big-time football, and they're a couple of yards.
Well, that's the thing. Is like Vanderbilt wide receivers should not be separating on Alabama defensive backs. That's not something we're used to seeing under Nick Saban.
No, again, I don't think Kane Womack helped him out a ton because he was exclusively man coverage, it felt like, for most of the game.
You saw Vanderbilt get to some man beaters, right? Some crossers, some meshes. Again, I was really, really discouraged with what Kane Womack trotted out there on defense because, again, you weren't over-talented. You were out-schemed.
I will say, part of the issue at like South Carolina, we get on Lenore Sellers about that passing attack. Their wide receivers need to do a better job, frankly, as well, of being 100%. Able to beat the man in front of them a little more consistently. A lot of South Carolina's offense has been attacking the flats with the tight ends. I mean, they are going to need to try to get the ball down the field and attack this secondary because that's, frankly, where I think they have not an advantage, but that's where Alabama's weak. That's, I think, where you can get them if you're a good developed team.
Now, flipping sides here, I don't have any problem with the Alabama offense. Like, again, they made, 3 or 4 bad plays in this football game. Other than that, they were moving the ball at will against Vanderbilt.
Now, you could have a slight concern about the right tackle spot. I thought that reverted back to maybe like 2023.
Well, it reverted back to kind of what we saw earlier in the season, too. Like, this was a problem. And then I came away from that Georgia game saying, oh, the Alabama tackles actually held their own against Georgia. I am starting to get real high on Alabama because they're starting to answer some of the questions that I had about this team. Elijah Pritchett struggled again. And what's tough here is, it's not going to get any easier because this South Carolina edge rusher position, it might be one of the best in the SEC. And nobody's talking about it. But it's true. Like, Dylan Stewart is a true freshman. That's about as impressive a true freshman performance I've seen in the SEC along the lines of scrimmage in a very long time. You have Kyle Kennard, Gilbert Edmond on the other side. You got 2 guys, so you can't really hide from them. That's my biggest concern here.
No, I do think Alabama, when they were really going and they can run the ball and they're ahead in the game, script's kind of what they want. I think they can do to what they were able to do to Georgia, to do it to South Carolina, where you slow those edge rushers down just by the nature. You really need to respect Jalen Milroe. You can't play very fast when he's on the field and when you know they can run it, because obviously, I mean, he was killing Georgia with that run scheme. He's just too explosive. He was killing Wisconsin with it too. I mean, that's where Alabama needs to try to be able to play with a lead and not have their defense let them get into a track meet, because that is fundamentally, I think, why they got into trouble with Vanderbilt, is their defense just – it didn't let Alabama's offense run, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like, when you can when you can turn into that, just you got to throw the football because you're down 2 scores in the second half, then the edge rushers just pinning the ears back. I wonder if Kalen DeBoer and Alabama do anything to help out the tackles. Look, I think Caden Proctor's played exceptional football. I think he's really coming into his own at the left tackle spot. Elijah Pritchett still is a concern, and it's easier when you only got one problem. And so it's like, all right, put a tight end there.
I'm just not totally ready to call Elijah Pritchett a problem. It was certainly not a good game, but again, they got themselves into a terrible spot for him to play good football, because they were pretty.
I'm ready to call it a problem because he wasn't good enough to play last year, and then now I know he's dealt with some injuries, but the consistency from him just never has been there. And if you're struggling against Vanderbilt edge rushers, you're probably going to struggle against with Dylan Stewart or Kyle Kennard. That's my biggest concern. But I think you're right. Like, if Alabama can stay two-dimensional, like, they want to run the football. Going into this game, they ran the football 58% of the time. That was top 30 in the country. Like, they want to run the football, but they kind of had to get away from it in that football game, and that kind of reared its ugly head. Dill, let's get into the pick here. Bama, 22.5-point favorites at home against South Carolina. Who are you rocking with here?
That's just a lot of points. And I think Alabama's going to handily win this game, because frankly, it'd be, unless Kane Womack doesn't get it together and doesn't get that defense a little more prepared, I don't really see how this South Carolina team scores a ton of points. Because again, where I think if Alabama's on and playing good defense, Where I think you can hurt them is getting the ball down the field and having your wide receivers make big plays. I just don't know that South Carolina has those guys right now. I think some of the young guys, you're encouraged by what they're doing, but they don't really have guys who scare me down the field. That feels like to me, again, assuming Alabama's playing the way they're supposed to play in the front seven, which is a great, great unit. I think it's really, really talented. I don't really see where South Carolina's answers are to score enough points.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take Alabama too. Like, I got a ton of respect for South Carolina's defense, but I think Alabama will be able to be explosive enough to put some points up on the board. Like, again, this is a team that routinely is hitting explosive plays for touchdowns, and I look at South Carolina. I'm kind of with you. I haven't seen enough from this offense to really trust them to keep up with Alabama. And you got to think that Alabama is going to be dialed in terms of getting back on track. I still think this is one of the best teams in the country. I had them as my number one team in the country less than 3 days ago. Give me Alabama the points here. I don't feel great about it because it's like, I'll say this: if South Carolina comes in and puts up some points, we're gonna have like an emergency episode talk about Kane Womack because I know you're a little bit more patient. I thought that was just an absolute disaster.
No, that was really bad. Like, I mean, just looking at those linebackers and how hesitant they were and how lack of free they were playing. Yeah. I mean, you can't have it if you're the coach. It's pretty obvious what Vandy was going to do. They certainly
it's not like they came out with the new game plan. Like, we saw all the same stuff when we watched the Missouri game. Like, it.
And if you have 11 guys who are bigger, stronger, faster than every 11 on there, like, you can't look that way.
You can't give up 40 points. All right, we'll cut it there. Alabama and the points. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.